another thing that's really illustrated by young Earth creationism and creation science is the relationship between the theology
Mm-hmm.
and then the sort of culture industry, which is, the theologians kind of tee it up by saying, look, this is the biblical view.
Yep.
Right. And then the creation scientists take it from there and say, well, look, I mean, this is the biblical view. So, we can set aside sort of the scientific establishment's story about, the origins and all that. We can just dismiss it. And what ends up happening is that you get folks in this subset of the creation science industry who they're basically just saying stuff, right? And they're not actually interacting with legitimate biblical scholarship. And also they're not interacting with legitimate scientific research.
Because they've established that they're independent of it. They don't need its validation.
By definition, their view is the biblical view. And we shouldn't expect them to agree with the secular scientists, because the secular scientists they don't take the Bible seriously. So what are we relying on? I don't know. It's just Ken Ham's just making stuff up.
Right.
And you see this, there's this intellectual no man's land where, there's somebody spouting purportedly biblical views, and we're all just supposed to take that as orthodox.
Right. Yeah.
There's no basis in history, no basis in anything really. And what the interesting part about it, right, from the standpoint of ideology, maybe, it would be helpful to say something about how sort of the mechanisms by which ideology operates. There's a feedback loop between social practice and cognition. So there's a particular kind of social arrangement or social practice that you favor, right? And that's actually going to, and then also your experience of certain social practices into which you've been enculturated. And that's actually going to affect how you think about things, right? And so, what's interesting here is that the creation science movement picks up steam in the 1960s. But the other interesting bit is like, the arguments aren't new. They go back to George McCready Price in the 1920s, right? So, nobody really understood or paid much attention to Price's work, but they take up different iterations of it in the 1960s. Well, what's happening socially in the 1960s? All of a sudden, there's an interest in getting out of public schools, right? And there's an interest in...
They wanted better education, right? That's the reason they split off from the public school.
No, exactly. They didn't want their kids being taught evolution. It had absolutely nothing to do, wink, wink, with the fact that public schools had been integrated and, and so on. And so it's like, okay, well, the arguments aren't new. The theology isn't actually orthodox. And I mean, I unpack all of that, right? So what's actually going on when a whole bunch of white evangelicals say, oh, we're young earth creationists now, and we think Ken Ham and John MacArthur and Al Mohler know more about the physical history of the earth than all of the combined wisdom in paleontology, archaeology, and on and on. I mean, we're talking about a couple dozen scientific subdisciplines.
Right. And the leading experts are non-scientists, which is interesting perspective. Just this total side note. Have you ever seen the movie Inherit the Wind that came out in 1960? It's about the school teacher that gets arrested for teaching evolution.
Oh, the Scopes trial?
Yeah, I mean, it's based on that, but they change the names and things, but it's a really cool movie. If you haven't seen it, it's worth watching. But there's a lot of really great conversations between these two lawyers that grew up together, and they have this conversation on the porch in the midst of this trial, and they're going head to head. One's very much the fundamentalist preacher, like banging his Bible. The whole town is like cheering him, having parades, walking into town. And there's this other lawyer that's kind of arguing for like new thoughts and new ideas. And they have this conversation on the porch about, if things never change, eventually the world passes you by. And it's a really cool movie, and it's relevant to this discussion. And they have a lot of these kind of debates with each other.
Funny how two people can start from the same point, drift apart. It's the nature of the life process. There used to be a mutuality of understanding and admiration between us, Henry. Why is it, my old friend, that you've You've moved so far away from me.
No, all motion is relative, Matt. Maybe it's you who have moved away by standing still.
If progress means abandoning God, abandoning the faith of our fathers.
I saw a demonstration of that faith tonight. It's a pretty deadly instrument, I'd say.
What you saw was a reflection of the violence and hate in the world around them, Henry. Your world. But they're driven to it because their faith was challenged. These are simple people, Henry, poor people. They work hard and they need to believe in something beautiful. They're seeking for something more perfect than what they have.
Window shopping for heaven.
And where do you want to take it away from, Henry? It's all they have. Like a golden chalice of hope.
When is it set? Is it set in the 1920s?
In
all likelihood, the fundamentalist preacher in that movie, if it were reality and it had been taking place in the 1920s, that fundamentalist preacher would have been advocating some version of old Earth creationism, right? According to which the Earth is in fact millions of years old, or as old as you like, right? And one of the interesting things to me is that now Albert
and
Mohler,
it is set in the 1920s. You're right.
Yeah.
So I knew it was based on the Scopes trial, but I didn't remember if they kept the time frame. Yeah,
so is the fundamentalist a young Earth creationist or older? Is he saying the Earth was created a few thousand years ago and in 6 24-hour days?
I believe that's his perspective in it.
Well, that would not have been the median view, even among fundamentalists.
That's interesting that
at the time. And what's fascinating is that you've now got certain young Earth creationists, right, who will say that, you know, even and I list them in the book, right? The fundamentalists in the 1920s would say that they're liberal and they don't actually take the Bible seriously. I mean, like, what? How do you?
Yeah.
Those are the moments where it's sort of like, again, I try to not take a position on whether the arguments are given in good faith, but those are moments where it gets the rationale for taking it at face value gets rather thin. Because it's like, so I'm like, I know that these guys have read books.
Well,
you know,
some have read books. Some of the leading thought leaders lately, I question whether they've read any books.